Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christine Rodriguez, and I have a podcast called AstrologyNow Podcast where I primarily talk about Vedic sidereal astrology. So please keep in mind today in this video, I am going to be using the Vedic sidereal zodiac. And so if you read the title of this video, we are talking about Britney Spears today. She has been massively covered in the news as of late. If you were born in the 80s or the 90s, I feel like Britney Spears was an integral part of our upbringing. Whether you liked her music or you didn't, it was incredibly difficult to miss her. She was labeled as the most popular and famous person in the entire world at one point in time. And so with this timeline of Britney Spears, we saw her rise to fame, become the most famous person in the entire world. And then we saw that followed by a lot of turbulence, a lot of ups and downs, really intense mental health issues that I cannot believe were recorded for the entire world to see. And then, of course, more recently in 2008, she fell underneath the conservatorship of her father and others, losing a lot of personal autonomy over herself and her daily life. Of course, it is July 1st as I'm recording this. We've also seen her appeal lately and be denied. And so with this timeline, the ups and downs, the turbulence, of course, as a Vedic astrologer, I was really interested in going back and seeing what was happening when she became famous, what was happening when she had her mental health issues, and what is happening now, and what does the future hold? And so today I am going to be looking at the chart of Britney Spears. I'm going to be looking at divisional charts, dashas, and transits just to bring some light into the situation utilizing Vedic sidereal astrology. Of course, before we get started, if you're going to leave any comments, please be kind to Britney Spears. Anything that's said that's negative or hateful, I am going to remove from the comment section because I just don't think that that's very helpful. And I also want to remind everybody that celebrities' entire lives are put out for the public to see. And having mental health issues captured on film, published to the world, I could only imagine what it does to somebody's mental health further, and also their sense of self, their sense of identity, their self-worth, and of course their pride. So I really do want to be supportive and kind in this segment, and I really hope that we can stay supportive and kind in the comments as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with you guys. We'll talk about Britney's chart a little bit. We'll look at the transits and the dashas. I found some pretty interesting stuff. So here is the chart of Britney Spears. To be completely transparent with you all, I haven't spent too much time looking at this, but when at first glance, I noticed some really interesting things that I do want to point out. I think that they're highly relevant. Again, we're focusing on dashas and transits primarily for this segment. But just looking at her chart for a moment, she is a Virgo ascendant. And in her ascendant, she has Saturn, which is, of course, the fifth house ruler. When the fifth house ruler moves into the first like this, it is going to make someone who's incredibly expressive and creative. The fifth house is all about performance. So, of course, she's going to be creative. She's going to be expressive. She's going to enjoy performing. And she's going to have the discipline to do it, right? And now, of course, her moon, which represents her mind and how she thinks, the area of the chart that's going to be incredibly important because this is where her mind and emotions lie, is in the fifth house of creativity, expression, performance, and of course, children. So children are going to be such an important part of her life. Creativity is going to be such an important part of her life, obviously. The Venus is not super close to the moon, but it's still conjoined. And the Venus and moon conjunction is one of the sweetest conjunctions you can have, right? Because the moon is our mind and our emotions and how we think and how we feel. And now it's with Venus, which is very sweet and artistic. And it has a very beautiful way of seeing the world. So when Venus and moon come together, it does, of course, amplify that creativity, that expression, that sweetness. I'm sure that she's like a really sweet person. And there is a lot of emphasis on children and children bringing a lot of happiness and having a lot of love there. So of course, with recent events, it is incredibly unfortunate. If you've ever taken a class with me and we've talked about astrology, I always talk about how the third house is the house of the media, of publications, of being on screen. It also is the house of music. The third and the fifth have to do with music and performance. So of course she does have this stacked third house. The sun especially is going to do well in the third house. And it is in Scorpio, and the sun in Scorpio I like the sun in Scorpio. I think that it does pretty well, though it does show that there is going to be a lot of metamorphosis and transformation throughout the life. I feel that sun in Scorpio is an indicator that someone is going to shed a lot of karma. And if you've been studying astrology for a while, you've noticed that the sun is Vargotama. It's in the same sign in the D9. Of course, so is her Venus, so is her Rahu and Ketu. She's got a really, really powerful chart. No doubt about that. Super powerful. Rahu, of course, is in the 10th. It has a mutual aspect with Jupiter. Really nice for fame and wealth and being well known. 10th house ruler is in the 3rd, career and advertising and being on screen and publications. So that's just like a brief rundown of the chart, right? This isn't really why I'm making the video. I wanted to talk about transits and dashas. So let's go ahead and get into that. So when we are looking at her chart, of course, the first thing that I noticed when I pulled her chart up is that she is going through Sati Sati. And what do I mean by that? Sati Sati is when Saturn transits over the moon. It's a 7.5-year period where Saturn transits the house before, the house of, and the house after the moon. So it takes a roughly 7.5 years. And so right now, Saturn is in the sidereal sign of Capricorn. Her moon is in the 10th sign of the zodiac, which is Capricorn. So Saturn is moving over her moon. Sati Sati is notoriously a time of hardship. It's a time of ups and downs. Something that I like to remind people of is that Sati Sati doesn't have to be completely detrimental. It doesn't have to be completely horrific. John Lennon became famous during his Sati Sati. So there are good things that can come of it. And it is a time of rising in status and rising in recognition in many ways. So I do want to keep that in mind. As of July 1st, Britney was denied this court appeal, but I don't know if this is completely over. And again, I'm going to tell you guys why. So she's going through Sati Sati. Again, it's July 1st, 2021. Rahu is currently in the sign of Taurus and Ketu is currently in the sign of Scorpio. So Ketu is transiting over her natal Mercury and her natal Sun. So when Ketu is transiting your first house ruler, this can bring an incredibly humbling experience. It can also bring, typically when Ketu transits the first house, this makes you question your identity. It's an identity shift in some capacity. And so when Ketu transits the first house ruler, it is kind of similar. There is this reshaping of how you see yourself, especially in addition to the sun, right? I'm really saying all of this because of the transit in general with Ketu transiting Mercury and the sun, because when Ketu transits the sun, this can definitely be a time of humility and having a humbling experience. And of course, because the sun is how we appear to the outer world, Ketu comes in and it reshapes that. It makes it something different. It can obscure it. But a lot of the time, what Ketu does is it causes a shift in identity and a shift in how we perceive ourselves and how the outer world perceives us. So this is if Ketu is transiting the ascendant. It's also similar to when Ketu is transiting the sun or the moon. And of course, Rahu is transiting the 9th house, and the 9th house is the house of dharma, of spirituality, of your belief systems, of ethics and virtue, but it's also the house of your father. And Rahu tends to obscure things. So as Rahu is transiting the 9th, it is certainly bringing these karmic deep influences from the father to light. Absolutely. Of course, we also want to look at transits from the moon. When Saturn is transiting the moon, it's aspecting the 3rd house, the 7th house, and the 10th house. So the public eye is changing, the relationships may be changing. Of course, her career is changing. And then this is the interesting part as well, is that Rahu is transiting now her 5th house. Ketu is transiting her 11th house. Remember, I was saying that when Ketu transits the sun or the first house ruler, it can kind of reshape who we are, how we see ourselves, how the outer world perceives us. Like the sun is like the outer world, how they see us, right? And the 11th house is the masses. So how the outer world is seeing her is totally changing, right? Mass amounts of people are seeing her in a different light. The perception of her is shifting. And one of the biggest reasons that all of this is coming up is because she wants to have children. She wants her IUD removed so that she can have kids. We see Rahu transiting the 5th house of creativity and children in in her moon chart, fifth from her moon. And then, of course, from her natal chart, Saturn is transiting the fifth house of children as well. Again, bringing up these karmic influences of children. And Saturn is transiting the 11th house, which is, of course, going to impact how people see her in the public eye. So there certainly is a lot shifting and a lot changing for her. I am trying to keep this relatively brief. One thing that I saw that was super fascinating is that when she became famous, or when she first dropped her album was in 1999, Jupiter was in Aquarius and it was just about to enter Pisces. So, you know, for a lot of that rise to fame, Jupiter was in the 7th house, aspecting her first house. And right now, Jupiter is in Aquarius. It's going to retrograde back into Capricorn. Jupiter is going to enter Pisces in April of 2022. So we are going to see that transit where Jupiter is transiting her 7th house, which of course is aspecting her first house, and it's casting a glance at the 11th house and the 3rd house as well. So we may see something shift, particularly because of the Dashas, which I'm going to get into. I think it will happen a little bit later than next year though. But anyway. So I did think that was interesting, seeing that Jupiter was transiting Aquarius at the time of her fame. Another thing that I see that I think is super fascinating is that K2 is transiting her moon and her Venus. As I was saying, when K2 transits these personal planets, they can have a profound impact in how we view ourselves, right? So even though this time period was wonderful for her and she was gaining a lot of fame and notoriety and recognition, I'm sure that it was really difficult to part with who she used to see herself as, her old life, who she was before she was famous. And I know that her mother had her enrolled in all sorts of things when she was young, so she's been used to this kind of thing. But again, nothing compares to being so profoundly well-known and popular and famous that you can't escape the limelight at all. You know, it really does change your life. So that is that influence of K2. Of course, from the moon, K2 would have been in the 1st, Rahu would have been in the 7th, which is going to do a lot of that shifting. And so looking at the Dasha systems really quickly. So when she released her first album in 2009 and 1999, and she really started to gain this recognition, the Dasha that she was in was Rahu and Saturn. And I think that this is profoundly important because, first of all, it's well known that in the Rahu Dasha, we tend to get a lot of material possessions, we get a lot of material achievements, and by the end of the Rahu period, we tend to lose all those things. It is an incredibly humbling experience. I've heard this taught about the Rahu Mahadasha quite a bit, keeping in mind the Mahadasha is a longer period of time. These periods within are going to be the Bhuktis, the smaller periods. And so when she released that first album and when she became famous, she was in the Rahu Saturn period. Saturn is the 5th house ruler, which is incredibly auspicious. It's going to carry an auspicious energy. It's also the dispositor of her moon. And Rahu is her 10th house. Rahu is placed in her 10th house. And so this is also going to give rise to her career, right? In her Rahu Mahadasha, this was when her career got completely activated. That's what happens when we run a Mahadasha. That planet gets activated. So she ran this Rahu Mahadasha. Career house became activated. Saturn is positioned in the 1st house of herself. It's connected to the 5th house of creativity and expression. This was when she released a huge creative expression to the world. It became her identity. She formed her large career with the Rahu period. So then, not long after that, unfortunately, she started to have mental health issues. Of course, she started to have mental health issues. I can't believe the incredible amount of pressure that celebrities are exposed to. So when Britney Spears had her breakdown, it was in 2007. And, you know, she probably started having these mental health issues a little bit before that. But when she actually had a breakdown, it was in 2007. And this is when, you know, after the breakdown occurred, it was all over the media. Her reputation took a massive hit. Things were never the same after that. And to go deeper, you know, when we are wanting to look at what's happening to somebody's career, we want to look at the D10 chart. And when planets are placed in the 8th house of the D10, especially the moon, this can show a fall of reputation. And as we can see in her D10 chart, moon and Rahu are conjoined. So when she went through this Rahu moon period in October of 2007, which is, it may have happened a few months after the breakdown, but still it was when everything started falling apart. When she fell under conservatorship in 2008, again, it was under this Rahu moon period. So when the tabloids were coming out, when she was falling from grace, when she had this horrible bar put on her of conservatorship, she was running the Rahu moon period. We can see in her D10 chart that moon and Rahu are conjoined in the 8th house, indicating a fall from grace and some loss of reputation. Of course, her moon and Rahu are also conjoined in her D9 chart. It's very interesting that it's in the 4th house of the home. And so I do think that this is indicative of having issues at home, having odd, bizarre circumstances happening at home, and of course having her inner world, her emotional world, which is represented by the 4th house, greatly disturbed. So I do want to point that out. All of this turbulence really started happening around the Rahu Sun, but really in the Rahu Moon period. So again, pointing out, she had this rise of fame in her Rahu period and a fall from grace at the end of her Rahu period. This is not uncommon for a Rahu Mahadasha. This is not to scare anyone with a Rahu Mahadasha. I just want to remind you all that part of Jyotish or Vedic astrology is the path to self-realization. And if we're on the path of self-realization, we want to remember to stay detached from the fruits of our actions, like it's taught in the Bhagavad Gita. I think that if we're studying Vedic astrology, we should also have a spiritual practice, because when we are studying Vedic astrology, we can see these things coming. But when we have a spiritual practice, we are built so that no matter what happens, we're fine anyway. So I just want to throw that out there. Don't look at the chart and get freaked out. There are always remedial measures and things that you can do to mitigate some of these negative effects. What I want to point out from here is that she's been in conservatorship for the majority of her Jupiter Mahadasha. And some of you are probably thinking, what? Jupiter is the great benefic. It's supposed to be a good planet, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, for Virgo ascendant, Jupiter isn't the strongest planet because it rules 2 Kendras. And from the moon chart, as a Capricorn ascendant, Jupiter is also not the best planet. It rules the 12th house, which is a Dastana house, and it rules the 3rd house, which is a minor Dastana house. So Jupiter isn't going to act as beneficially as it may for the rest of us. So this is important to keep in mind. But Jupiter is coming to a close, and then she is going to enter the Saturn Mahadasha, which I actually have a lot of hope for, because she is a Capricorn moon, meaning Saturn is very well established, right? It's the 1st house ruler. Saturn is going to be acting in a positive way. From the moon chart, Saturn is, of course, in a triconal house. It's in the 9th house, which is very fortunate. From her natal chart, Saturn is in a Kendra house and a triconal house, which is also, again, very nice. From the D9, it's not the best. It's in the 6th, but it is in an Upachaya house. But, of course, it is placed 12th from itself. So, it may give some of these mixed results. I know that Jupiter is not the worst planet in her chart. And, there's no denying that this Jupiter Mahadasha has not been a fun time. I think that at the end of the Jupiter Mahadasha into Saturn Mahadasha, we will start to see some improvements. And I do think particularly that when Jupiter is transiting Pisces, I think that we will see improvement in her life as well. One thing that I wanted to point out, just backtracking a little bit, this is super, super fascinating. When she became famous, Ketu was transiting her moon, Rahu was transiting the 11th. When she had her breakdown and fell into conservatorship, it reversed. Rahu was transiting over her moon, Ketu was transiting her 11th house. Super, super interesting stuff. So that is something that we, of course, want to look at, and from her moon chart, that would be the 1st and 7th. So again, having that shift of identity and having all of these really shocking things happen, because even becoming famous, again, it can really catch you off guard, especially when you're that young. Of course, going into conservatorship is ridiculous, and I couldn't even imagine. But anyway, this is a very brief video. I know that I was speaking really fast. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that this has inspired you to look deeper into this situation and explore more for yourself. I know that I am going to. Again, this is just stuff that I was looking at this morning and I thought that it was interesting, and I never make videos, so I thought that I'd just hop on here, make it quick and easy. Here it is. I hope you learned something. Again, my name is Christine Rodriguez, and if you are interested, I'm posting a podcast tomorrow on Astrology Now podcast. So if you liked this video, if you want to have more astrological information in your week, please follow my podcast, Astrology Now podcast. Again, my name is Christine Rodriguez. Thank you so much.